Well, Mike, we're recorded.
We're,
Did I throw you off there?
a little bit. Yeah, we are recorded.
Yeah. Well, what fun would this be if you could expect the outcome every single time?
No, absolutely. We, as we're talking, we're live. I don't think we do this nearly enough. So if you'd have said, Mike, we're live, it would not have been a lie.
Yeah. Well, little do you know that I recorded my section of this and I've predicted every single one of your responses.
Oh, it would work too.
Yeah. Well, with that, why don't you say we start the show?
Hit it.
Well, welcome to hotlou Happy Hour. I am your host, Lou Abramowski, or somewhat affectionately known as a bat.
I am.
Yeah, I tried to make it happen where you would notice at the exact same time, but you didn't. So maybe we ought to do something more like this.
Whoa, that is ridiculous.
It's very realistic, isn't it?
Why is he in the rain?
It's probably at his inauguration.
Oh, okay. Now you can tell by the huge crowds.
Yeah, exactly. You do wonder, if Biden gets elected, I have a feeling he's going to have the smallest turnout ever for an inauguration. How's my Trump? It needs work.
It's better than your bat.
But not as good as my Jennifer Tilly impression.
What's the app I should be downloading?
Oh, I tried to tell you, you'll need this Snap Cam. It probably won't work live on the show unless you want to leave and come back, which you're
that's all right. I'll just have it
to do. Yeah. I mean, you're welcome to do anything on the show at this point, given the fact that we remarked prior to recording that this is one of the first shows where we, instead of preparing with 3 to 6 text messages, we're literally down to 0.
Literally. Well, as it says on my name here that the viewers can't see, it is Friday.
Yeah. And you are contractually obligated to do absolutely no prep work.
So. Yeah. I mean, I'm amazed. I'm in my office right now. I'm amazed I'm even working. I try to take Fridays off in the summer, but as I was telling you, I am swamped. I'm beyond swamped.
Well, it's got to feel like you're in a unique position compared to 4 months ago at this point, right?
Yes. It feels very, very different than 4 months ago, and much, much better. I'm very pleased to be swamped.
Well, might as well go cool on a Friday like this, and it just turns into a yellow box. This isn't bad. I'm feeling this. This feels like a Friday to me.
Yeah, it looks like you're in Australia.
Yeah, it's funny to think that the Australian fires feel like they were maybe a year ago, but that was still in 2020.
2020 is proving itself to be quite the year. Today's news is that Ruth Bader Ginsburg indeed has cancer again. I don't know if you've seen that. So,
yeah. I mean, I think we have already concluded that we're going to probably spend the rest of 2020 in a real life version of Weekend at Ruth Bader Ginsburg's.
Well, there are some. I would never say this because I'm too classy, but there are some who say that the previous administration in Minnesota was 8 years of that. So,
yeah, that makes sense. Well, and there's probably an argument that but some people are already arguing that about RBG, right?
Yeah, I mean it's like obviously it's not to make light of what is she, 80-something-year-old woman's health, yeah. But you can't not sort of go, oh man, if there's anything to make this year wilder, the let's just call it retirement of RBG would do it. And that would make the stakes even higher.
It would, and I'm sure Mitch McConnell would be first in line to say how important it is for a president who's done so much for this country to be able to appoint another Supreme Court justice, wouldn't you say?
I suspect that his Merrick Garland precedent would not hold.
We'll see what ends up happening. Well, hopefully it won't matter, because we're obviously, we don't.
Well, as a person who thinks that she's, very notable and very prominent judicial thinker in this country's history, I do hope that she resigns from the court, because I think she's a terrible justice. But I wish her nothing but good health.
Yeah, I think we all do. So what else is happening? Are we gonna play? It's so crazy to think that we're like 5-6 weeks away from the beginning of the NFL season. Do I have that number right?
Are we though, Lou?
Yeah, I think that's the real fact check that needs to happen here.
As we record this, it's July 17th, and in a regular year, absent a global pandemic, we'd be about 2 weeks away from training camp opening, and probably 2.5 or 3 weeks away from the preseason. Usually that's like kind of the first week of August, and there's 4 games, and we start to watch with interest as the NFL gears up. And I don't remember, because it's been 16 years ago since the last offseason, but I think they made some modifications to the schedule this season. Or it's either this season or next, where they were going to drop down to 3 preseason games. There was going to be an additional game in the regular season. And I think they added a team in each, the AFC and the NFC, to the playoffs.
Oh, wow. I didn't know. I thought that was next year. Was it?
It might be next
possible.
Some of these rules were taking effect in 2020, and some were going to be in 2021. Maybe the playoff expansion was next year, but who knows what they'll retain given the environment that we're in.
Can we talk about the playoffs in sports a little bit? Because I am of the mindset, and I think we had a conversation about this. I think we share this viewpoint, that we don't really understand the point of the regular season if most of the teams are just going to make the playoffs anyway.
Yeah, well, yeah, but I don't think it's most of the teams, right? I mean, the NFL does this better than the other sports, I think, for the most part. Actually, baseball used to do it perfectly as far as having a minimum number of teams in the playoffs. But playoffs are exciting. I mean, and sports should be about excitement. And the NBA and the NHL have long been the sort of worst offenders, where it's pretty close to half the teams that make the playoffs. It's not exactly half. It's closer to half than it is a third. But I think so. What is it now? So right now, or last year, the AFC and NFC each sent 6 teams, and I think that the idea was to make it 7, and they would only give 1 bye per conference. So we had 6 with 2 byes. So now we have 7 with 1 bye. That actually does make the last couple weeks of the regular season far more exciting. Because week 17 in most years is useless. I mean, the vast majority of the teams have the playoffs locked up, and there's often like 1 or 2 games that week that really matter, and then the rest of them are all just basically, exhibition games. And so the idea behind a 7-team playoff would change that to where now, there's more spots to fight for, and B, there's only 1 bye to fight for. So even at the top of the league, you're fighting for that bye. So I like what they do, and I think generally speaking, the NFL does pretty much everything right. When it comes to promoting their product.
Yeah, well, so we'll definitely see how that shakes out. It's interesting to me that, this makes it officially 2 teams away for the NFL for most of the teams to make the playoffs. But to your point, it does make it more exciting. But occasionally with the NHL and the NBA, I almost feel like the end of the playoffs overlaps with the beginning of the next season.
Oh, yeah. Well, and this year, if they ever come back, it may literally do that. Depending on the calendar and whatnot. But, I totally agree with you. And it's part of the reason why I've never really been an NBA or an NHL fan. I enjoy the college versions of those sports just sort of dramatically more than professional. However, I will say that in both cases, I have, especially in recent years, found myself tuning into the NBA and the NHL only for the playoffs. And I think it kind of reinforces your point. Like, what's the point in watching a regular season game in January that really doesn't matter all that much? There's still 82
Yeah.
games, which is an awful lot. So there's a lot of opportunity in the mid-season to either go up and go down, and there's 8 spots to fight for and whatnot. So I do, but that said, playoff hockey in particular is fantastic. That they just all out for in a way that it's like a different game.
Yeah, I've kind of long said that the overtime rules in hockey are just like the most exciting rule in all of sports. When they start, playing with limited players on the ice, and it's just like a free for all, and everybody's trying like their hardest for just like 3-4 minutes.
And I'm certainly not a great hockey mind, but what I would say is that, in terms of analyzing the sport, but 4-on-4 makes such an amazing difference in like how fast everything goes. It's just so much more exciting. It makes me kind of want to watch it all the time that way. But no, I love it. And now, do we know, as I look at this, let's see, 17, 18, 19, 12, we should be having Major League Baseball season in a week, right?
Mm-hmm.
Is that still on? I mean, everybody's getting the COVID, and now they're starting to die. So all the stuff I was saying was total bullshit. So,
well, it occurred to me yesterday when, actually 2 days ago, when Walmart announced that and Walmart is the biggest retailer in the world, announced that at all their stores, at least in the United States, that mask wearing was required. And
as of I think this weekend.
Well, the point that I was making is Walmart was really the first big retailer to mention that, and then all of the rest followed. And that same thing happened, if you recall, on March 11th, I think, with the NBA.
Yep.
Rudy Gobert, patient 0, tested positive for coronavirus, and then they immediately suspended the season, like basically mid-game. Like a lot of the play. Yeah. And then the next day, like everybody followed suit, and I was in California at the time, and we joked around that that was cancellation Thursday, because we didn't have like a Black Friday type of, or what's the stock market failing? That was a Black Tuesday, right? Yeah, something like that. Cancellation Thursday. But it's interesting to see that, to your point yesterday about how, government mandates aren't really going to affect behavior all that much, and that the free market will help us. Like, here we are really following the example of the NBA and Walmart. Who would have thought that would have happened in 2020?
I don't think I made that point explicitly last show yesterday, but I think it follows perfectly as far as the retailers in particular and live sports. The worst customer is a dead customer. And so, my whole premise here is based on, sort of how humans function, that we respond very well to incentives, and that follows all the way up into corporations, because corporations are made of people who have economic interests, who have, I don't care whether they care about me as a human being. I assume nobody does except for my family. You know what I mean? So government, I know you do. I consider you part of my family. But I mean, I don't think that any large enterprise, government or corporate, has any of my personal well-being in mind, but they have their own well-being in mind, which is exactly why my mindset is what it is. That I don't trust the government and I don't trust corporations. But that doesn't put me in a weird, like, paranoid place. It just puts me in a, like, I got to look out for myself place.
Yeah, well, I'm always curious about this, and I think the last 4 months I've been far more curious about it, in terms of how specifically the Republican Party and the government thinks about making these decisions from the standpoint of keeping their voters alive, as well as the government keeping their taxpayers alive. Although it's probably worth noting that with the government, as you age, you're not, the oldest among Americans are not paying a ton in taxes. In fact, they're receiving Social Security. So maybe there's some sort of weird reverse incentive there to not want to save them. But
no, I don't think I think you're giving them too much credit.
Okay.
You know,
You mean the government or the Republican Party
yes.
or both? Yes.
Well, I mean, and as far as it goes, like the government's incentive is not to. I think you're giving them too much incentive or too much credit rather. The government's incentive is not to keep you alive. The government's incentive is to keep themselves employed and elected. Um, Period. End of sentence. Like, and if you don't follow that, then I got a bridge to sell you. And as far as the Republican Party goes, I think their incentive is to get their members elected, or their incumbent, more to the point, their incumbents reelected, and their challengers elected. And so, what works best? I mean, I don't think this is like sort of earth-shattering analysis. Like, sort of everything follows from that. And as an enterprise, as an organization, that's what it should be. That's what it's founded to do. And so why would you expect anything different from it? Same as the Democratic Party. Green Party, not so sure what they're all about. But
the Tea Party?
The major parties who have an actual, mathematical chance at holding, majorities in elective office, like that's what everything is geared towards, and that's what it should be. And by the way, I mean, incentives matter is the point. And the incentive, if you're a bureaucrat, and this is like an actual interesting point when it comes to the furor this week over Dr. Fauci, right?
Not furor with the umlauts, right?
No, unintentional.
Furor Fauci.
That was a Freudian slip there. But the kerfuffle.
There you go.
Over Dr. Fauci that I've pointed out on this show multiple times that, forget what the president said or what his trade representative said. That was very strange and kind of virtually unprecedented to have one member of an administration sort of publicly shaming another. That was totally bizarre. But there's a general whose name escapes me, who made a very cogent point that I've been making, so I feel very smart, that it's really not a function of whether Dr. Fauci has been right or wrong. It's that he, by his own admission, has one very specific interest in mind, and that's it. It's not his job to balance public health versus economy. It's never been his job. And so to the extent that people want to just invest him with sort of total authority, well, you're not going to like the results. Rather, you may like it as goes the sort of pandemic, if you conclude that's the only thing that matters right now. But you're not going to like it very much in terms of the recommendations. And I do want to I had a very interesting sort of conversation today via text with a group of people who've been very skeptical about most of this.
Well, we've kind of said it since the beginning. We're desperately seeking for that one brilliant genius that we can trust, who is an expert in public policy, in public health, and in economic policy. Yeah. And I'm kind of shocked where there aren't 5,000 of them.
Well, but what we're supposed to have are those interests being represented and sussed out,
right,
in a systematic way, via our elected representatives and our executive. And if you are of the mindset that you think that's happening swimmingly, I disagree. But but that's the system we're supposed to have, is that these interests there's not one that trumps another necessarily, other than through sort of negotiation and give and get. That's what's supposed to be happening.
Yeah, and if you're going to criticize Fauci for not getting anything done, I just think that you're not paying attention, or you're projecting your own intentions on what he's supposed to be doing, because he literally kicked off the search for a vaccine only a few days after being briefed on what was happening in Wuhan. And that's how we got the vaccine trial, or at least the first initial trials happening in March, which was like only 2-ish months away from him kicking it off. And now we're probably going to see a larger trial in like a week and a half from today with like 30,000 people. And it's the type of vaccine trial, I'm forgetting the name right now, that it actually has the like highest likelihood of success that they have available. So from that perspective, he just, led the charge for what might be the fastest creation of a vaccine in human history.
Yeah. Well, I mean, and that would be the, sort of game changer Deus ex machina that we're looking for here, right? That people probably expected to come weeks into this, not months into this, let alone many months into this, which is what it would be. I mean, even if these trials go very, very well, I find it hard to believe that there'd be any kind of full scale, worldwide, deployment by the end of the year, or maybe it would sort of be starting.
Well, Elon Musk said this really well in a different context. Like, a lot of people just think that, we can snap our fingers and then there's this horn of plenty as Americans that the resources we want will just appear before us. But, thinking that you have to...
That's been our experience as a country for the past couple hundred years, for the most part.
Yeah.
And so it's not an unforgivable assumption that, and frankly, just again, whatever my politics are, that's because we live in a free society. That's because we respect private property. That's because we used to have a rule of law that more or less let you go do what you're going to do, and it's basically my right to extend my fist and at your nose, and beyond that, we don't have rules. That's supposed to be the idea. And that's why I'm a libertarian, because I still think those ideas created the best society that this planet has ever produced. Not knowing what happened with the lizard people prior to humans coming up. I don't know that. I wasn't here. But
well, hold on. Are you suggesting lizard people aren't still here?
Oh, great question. Great question. Yeah, I don't know. There are people. That's a worthwhile show topic at some point. The lizard people conspiracy.
Oh man, we could have a lot of fun with the conspiracy theorists and the aforementioned hosts of that Bitcoin podcast, the second biggest Bitcoin podcast in the world. Both of them are gigantic conspiracy theorists and believe in everything QAnon is doing, and it's scary, but it might be kind of entertaining to have somebody like that on the show.
So I had this real interesting conversation with some mutual friends. I won't name names, but let's just say that the first friend once created a reservation for you, and he's been a thoroughgoingly anti-government, anti-walls, anti-Trump for that matter.
I mean, anti-whatever is popular.
Yeah, like this is a cold, and like all, and making really sort of interesting points, not just being, the point being, the CDC director within the past week or 6 years, I forget which, more or less came out and said, if we all took a break from each other for 4 weeks, this would be over. Like if we could, so, and now that we're seeing this resurgence, which does seem to be resulting in increased death and others, in particular in the Sun Belt, it would be, and this might be, and this was his point, and I'm not gonna, I don't need to name names, he didn't give me permission to out him, but I thought it was a really interesting thought experiment that if Trump wants to save his chances at re-election, which are looking pretty dim, to say the least, what if Trump came out and said, all right, here's what we're going to do. We're shutting down everything for 4 weeks. And I mean, under penalty of law, and I mean everything. That if you need medication, we'll figure out a way to get it to you. The emergency rooms will be open, but that's it. And you are locked in your home. We're deputizing the National Guard and the state police forces to enforce this. It's a 24-hour curfew for 4 weeks, after which everything is back open. Everything. We're going back to normal. And how many Americans would take that deal today based on the last 4 months of what we've gone through, this up and down and balancing of interests and trying to, again, having this sort of grace that these folks are trying to get this right, but largely have not done a great job at it. I mean,
well, I'm starting to wonder if he's listening to the show, because I made that point about a month ago. You might recall. You might recall that I said, the crazy thing is that we actually do have the power to solve this crisis. That's the crazy part about this, but it comes at a great cost. So, and that cost would be sitting in our homes and not interacting with people for, however many weeks. And there might be, preparation and other things like that.
To my point yesterday, like I wouldn't, I think most of this would be totally unconstitutional, but I guess we don't much care about that. I mean, it would have to, it would greatly have to test our willingness to trust in government, which I don't and don't recommend that you do either. But and it would have to greatly test our sort of belief and trust that that would actually get the job done, and to believe the other side of this, that they wouldn't change their mind 3 weeks in. And which is the ultimate danger in it, is that, like, if we make a bargain and then you renege on it in a few weeks, you have all the guns. Like, so, and at that point they're deployed.
Yeah.
So it is a frightening proposition to my core. However, it could work if we all bought in, but we'd all have to buy in, and and I'm talking like everybody, Democrats, Republicans, governors, CDC people. Like, I don't know what the damage to the economy would be, and that would be like an enormous part of this, which is we'd have to figure out a way to guarantee, probably another stimulus type of situation. I wonder why we wouldn't just do basically a quarter-long tax holiday, and basically say your third quarter income taxes are suspended to pay for this, more or less.
Mm-hmm.
And then a solid promise that we are back open. We're going to shut down, let's say for the month of August, we're just shutting down entirely, and under force of law. You will not leave your house. And there will be police keeping you there. And I'm not saying, look, I'm not arguing for this, but I think it's an interesting thought experiment because would you take that bargain if it guaranteed, or at least gave you a serious shot at curing COVID and just being able to move on with our lives?
Yeah. And
I'm sorry that you made that point.
Yeah, well, and I think I probably just didn't express it in the same way because we, are just riffing on the show about it. But it's interesting to know that we do have that power. We're just not willing to make that sacrifice universally, Well,
and that's the deal, is it would have to be
exactly.
And it would raise the question that we were sort of grappling with yesterday: is, are we willing to make that? My assumption is no. My assumption is that people would cheat the system. What
my assumption is, as you were kind of talking through this, in another layer of the interesting thought experiment of this is that if that directive came from Donald Trump, there would be a lot of people who are in support of shutdown right now immediately going, of course he's doing this. Yeah. What is he? He's a dictator. Like, they would not praise him.
Part of our conversation is like, in order to actually have the buy-in, you'd have to have Trump and Pelosi and Chuck Schumer and Mitch McConnell and standing side by side, basically saying, look, we hate each other and we're going to be doing this election thing, but for now, we're calling it all off for your own good.
Yeah.
Now, there is a snowflake's chance in Phoenix that that's going to happen. I mean, like not zero, because nothing's zero, but basically zero. However, this is why it's an interesting thought experiment. So to your point that you made that I forgot, if we had let's say we had a 90% degree of certainty that would basically just get rid of coronavirus as a threat to this country. Is that worth the squeeze? Is that juice worth the squeeze? And I don't know. I don't. And then, all the assumptions that are baked into that. Would we actually comply? Would there be? What would we do with our borders when we're done with that month? Right? Would we reopen our borders? Because if we're cured, and Canada does something different.
And how devastating would it be if we finished off that 4 weeks and then suddenly there was a vaccine available?
Oh, goodness. That would be peak 2020.
Yeah, or on the opposite end of the spectrum, one thing, even though there's some promising early results on this whole thing, it'd be very, one of the questions that I'll ask occasionally for people is like, how would your mind change if you knew there would never be a vaccine, as there is not with, a handful of very deadly viruses?
I'm old enough to remember when people like Tim Walz told us that we couldn't live like this, until a vaccine is developed. So
You are old enough to remember?
I'm old, and I'm today days old, I'm older than 4 months old, I guess is a better way to put it.
Yeah, I had an interesting it wasn't really a debate on Facebook, but just a comment that it was an idea that's been stewing in my head that I couldn't really formulate, but writing it down helped me a little bit. That I think a lot of people, and it are a comedian friend of mine who has occasionally made appearances on the show with kind of his funny Facebook posts, once said, "Isn't it funny how the like most skeptical people on the planet happen to also be the most gullible as it relates to like conspiracy theories?" And I thought that was hilarious. But there's this really weird underlying thing about that, or underlying nuance about how too many people equate entire dismissal with skepticism. And they think that like dismissing all ideas or assuming the opposite is the same as being a skeptic. And we heard a little bit of this, and we talked about it with Isaac Saul on Tuesday. When he was writing for the Huffington Post, he would find that people just outright dismissed everything he said just because of his association with the Huffington Post. This is where this started for me too.
I would have. I mean, I just so thoroughly distrust that publication that I would never basically, it would take a lot to concede that something published under its headline.
Yeah. So this is where it ended up becoming interesting, because the comment was something along the line. The post was about how our friend in the White House, the press secretary, Kayleigh, yeah, had said something like she's not going to let science stand in the way of reopening schools, which is like this crazy comment. Of course, the Huffington Post tried to blow it up as much as possible. And then the person, and the caption on it was something like, "This is not the Onion." And it was a link to a Huffington Post, and somebody's comment was, "Might as well be." And then followed up with like 17 other links showing the exact same quote again on all this. And the point that I was trying to make is that I think skepticism isn't about dismissal. Skepticism is actually kind of the opposite. It's an interest and a curiosity in knowing in actually seeking the real truth there. So this person continued to dismiss the reality, despite the fact that there were just like hundreds of outlets covering this exact quote, as well as like video of it. And just because the Huffington Post covered it, this person just refused to believe that it was real, even though there, like it was all over the place. And I think people like
here, but if you can, I don't know if you can.
Oh boy, here we go.
Yeah, you can't. I can't do it. But it's a comparison of CNN headlines on hydroxychloroquine, and
it's amazing.
Couldn't find it. But I mean, this we beat the media. Yeah. But 3 months ago, it's hydroxychloroquine is a Trump made up. Here's all the facts. So then 2 weeks ago, study finds hydroxychloroquine helped coronavirus patients survive better, as though there were only the two, right? That it could only be hydroxychloroquine is the proof, is the cure, is the white whale that that's the wrong analogy, but that we're looking for. And then on the other side, nope, this is made up because Trump wants to make money off the company he owns. As though there was not a spectrum of potential outcomes of drug, which I don't even know where on the spectrum this would fall, but probably more towards the Trump side than on the CNN side. But the news's job these days, I'm accepting places like Tangle, are to put us in camps and keep us there, because it helps them with clicks, it helps them with advertising revenue, whatever it is. I don't know what it all is, but that's that's why I'm so excited about places like Tangle that seem to be operating on a different model.
Yeah. Did you ever listen to that podcast I sent over a couple of weeks ago? It was called like the Rabbit Hole, and it was about people who had become kind of radicalized by falling down this weird YouTube algorithm that was reinforcing beliefs. slowly but surely.
I don't remember where you sent that to me. If it was for a text or something,
Yeah, we talked about it on the show briefly,
I'm very
but
siloed when it comes to where I put information. So if you sent me a podcast and it'll immediately go to my podcast app and put it in,
yeah.
it'll go into the memory hole.
But it was kind of fascinating to see how people become radicalized in these environments because they end up this algorithm feeds into
I
their
remember talking
biases,
about this. Yeah.
and like eventually, because the individual is signaling to the platform that these are the types of videos that they want to see, the recommendations continue to just give them more and more information along those lines. So it becomes this echo chamber where you suddenly think YouTube doesn't even have anything but QAnon content on it, and you slowly become radicalized. And the same thing happens, maybe not through algorithmic means, but through CNN, because they recognize that by reinforcing somebody's
Fox
belief.
News. I mean, we
Yeah.
it's much more popular to point out Fox News and the people who watch Fox News who will only refer you to Fox News, and Fox News said this and that, and that's all they watch all day long. And we know these people, but the same is true of CNN and MSNBC. And we just, it's not as popular or fun to beat up on those people, I guess. But, and I would say the New York Times, the Washington Post, I mean, the LA Times, there's the media is full of this. And whatever the reason is, and I've said it on this show, I never, is the daily reference to Ben Shapiro. It's a Ben Shapiro rule, but it's right. I mean, never attribute to malice what can be attributed to incompetence or some other means. I don't think it's necessarily malicious. I think it's probably just their business model. Back to the way we started this show. What's the incentive? What's the incentive for Fox News to do that? Well, the incentive is to know your audience so well that you can advertise to them the products that they will want to buy.
Mm-hmm. And capitalism's obsession with growth too. Like, I actually think Ben Shapiro is really emblematic of this problem. I think probably less so than others, but I think we had this conversation with about Tommy Lahren, about Milo Yiannopoulos or whatever. They seem to arrive on the scene, and they try to stay kind of centrist, although they're probably a little bit right leaning, but they get so much feedback. They get so much affirmation and validation from the right by being a little bit right of center, that slowly but surely they get down this path until they're printing off mugs to pour liberal tears in. Right?
Well, yeah, but I mean, now do Alyssa Milano, now do Deborah Messing.
Oh yeah.
Jimmy.
No,
I mean, there's for every Tommy
I think
Lahren, there's and I don't know about Milo. Milo's a shock jock. I mean, he's
no doubt.
You shouldn't seriously.
I guess that where I was coming from with the difference is I don't see the Alyssa Milanos or the woke starting in the center and then slowly shifting more aggressively over to the woke side. I think they're already there because they already know they have that radicalized audience, right?
But Jimmy Kimmel wasn't that way. I mean, he was.
You're right.
More or less.
Right. He was on something called The Man Show.
Yeah. Right.
They had girls in trampolines.
Right. I mean, or actually, it's got to be fun to do a story or a documentary on Kimmel and Carolla, because Carolla's gone way the other way. The show, and he's far more interesting to listen to, in my judgment. Because I happen to agree with him, but also because he seems to have a basis for it. Where he can explain it. He can tell you why he's become more right, even though he still to this day describes himself as a liberal, the way that he understood it 20 years ago or whenever, 30 years ago. He always understood himself as a liberal. He still considers himself a liberal, but he doesn't recognize his compatriots anymore.
Yeah, that'd be fascinating. Well, we've kind of been talking about how we manage the show moving forward, and we love the Lunatics' take on it because we have an interesting thing happening. We have a few dozen people who are just super dedicated to the show, and we love those Lunatics. But we also have been thinking about how do we manage this? Do we change the format? Do we change the frequency? How do we appeal to you? And also thinking about reaching more people. And this will be your daily reminder to start the watch parties, like the show, comment if you're watching here. But some more like designed or edited content is something that's, Mike and I have talked about with the programming. We'd love to hear, and frankly, what Isaac's doing. Isaac Saul, our guest from Tuesday, he started a newsletter, and, Mike and I have talked about that too. We'd love to hear your comments on, what you're looking for from us. Is it, it's now turned into completely news. like,
yeah, which is kind of too bad, because I mean, but I'm willing to do it if people are interested. I kind of wish we were able to do what we set out to do and keep it a little more lighthearted, but we didn't predict the way the world would implode.
I mean, I think even that, like, we were still trying to be fun with coronavirus stuff early on, and obviously the death and other numbers were terrible. But then
favorite Corona memes. I mean, that was like a daily piece of the show, which is kind of totally fallen by the wayside.
Yeah, but bringing back some more entertainment to it, or focusing on maybe some more design content is something that we've definitely been considering. So let us know in the comments, lunatics. We're trying to make the show that we want to see by being kind of entertaining, but like so much happens every single day, even more so than even like what felt like a year ago. And it could be the election year, it could be all kinds of stuff, but yeah, we're definitely thinking long and hard about the future of Hot Lou Happy Hour and what it's going to look like. So we could really use your input.
Please. Also 5 stars out of a potential 5.
Yeah, I promise the podcast is coming. We'll deliver. Yeah, well, thanks, Obama. I blame him. Okay, well, that's gonna about do it on the Friday Fun Show, the Friday show.
Friday.
I think it was pretty fun.
Good. It's always interesting. It's interesting to get your perspective on things, and it's just we're all. I mean, we're not. What's the thing we're supposed to say? We're not all in the same boat, but we're all in the same storm, and that's a reasonable analogy. But we are all in something together, and it's useful to remember that.
Yeah.
It's not. If you look at the world through a few different prisms, you might have a little. We might have a better perspective.
Yeah. Well, with that, I am excited about. We've got one guest next week, pretty much confirmed for Lou's Day. And it's a security expert, because you may have seen a couple days ago, like a gigantic amount of huge accounts on Twitter all got hacked and started spreading this Bitcoin scam. It'd be very interesting to see how much this scammer earned, because Bitcoin transactions cannot be reversed. But we're going to talk about that and some other stuff. So it's going to be news related, but we're not going to talk too much Trump, I don't think, and not too much coronavirus, but
I would love to, and I know we've teased this, and I'd love to pull it off though, is to get a full sort of view of the school question, which in my mind is only going to get more and more pitched and make people more and more angry at each other, as one side thinks that the other side wants to deprive their children of any chance of succeeding in the world, and the other side thinks that the other side just wants everybody to die. Because that's how it's going to come off, right? I mean, the politicians that we put in charge of this, that's how they're going to characterize it.
Yeah, and I have to show this. I know we're trying to wrap up here in the next minute or two, but I want to show this pretty interesting thing that I saw this morning and published on the hotlou.com Facebook page. Mike, you might enjoy it here, because this is about as libertarian as I think you can get. But I think now is the time for teachers to eat. That's metaphorically speaking. Quit your job and charge $250 a week to homeschool 10 kids. Do such a great job that we never send these kids back to school. Your class of 25 students will be cut to 10, and your income goes from $30,000 to $120,000 annually. You're welcome.
So I literally had this conversation with loyal lunatic, my brother-in-law, Mitch, yesterday. And I don't know if he was just opining on this exact thing, or that he's actually had he works in a school, or he's had conversations with teachers about this. I don't know why you wouldn't do it if you were a teacher and that schools aren't open. Like, you'd have a market. You would absolutely have a market of parents who would pay $250 a week for you to even just work with the kids on their assigned lessons through distance learning, which is hot garbage.
Yeah.
Got a trained credentialed teacher who's no longer working 10 hours a day in the classroom.
You're going to interact with fewer people too across the board, because you don't have coworkers and you don't have like building staff and you don't have other classes that you're interacting with. And I think that figure actually meets the current criteria for indoor spacing, right?
Yeah, I think it does. And you could absolutely, you could absolutely figure out a way to do this in a socially compliant way. The kicker would be that the taxpayers are still paying for your other job that you're not doing.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting. Well, we have to table this because we got to wrap up. But
I've got to call 1 minute. So
as do I. Okay. Again, check in Tuesday, but subscribe on YouTube, because some of those videos are now actually getting views, and that's a good place to watch it. And you can even just listen to the audio if you have the YouTube whatever subscription. We're also going to try to get an Ultimate Player again tomorrow, or sorry, next week on the show too. So, but if you're looking for guests or other topics, let us know in the comments. Like, share, 5 stars, subscribe, smash all of the buttons, because they probably help us. I am your host, Hot Lou.
I am off to a meeting, Mike Franklin.
We'll talk to you next week.